In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The author of the letter is St. John, the Apostle. He's the same author of the Gospel of St. John. And nobody had argued the authorship. Nobody said that somebody else wrote it under the name of John, because there's a lot of similarities in language, style, theology. Not many people disputed that the author of the letter, the writer of the letter, is the same person that wrote the Gospel. And he had even some similarities that you would notice from the beginning. Something like the beginning. He starts with the beginning. So when did he write it? If you look at the content of the letter, there is a hint to Gnosticism. And we're going to have to talk about that. What is Gnosticism? It's a Greek word, comes from nous, to know. To know. And this would talk about it in details a little bit more, because it's important. I'll tell you why when we come to it in chapter 1, at the end of chapter 1, beginning of chapter 2. So if that's the case and he is confronting this problem, the Gnosticism, then the date of this letter is going to be late. So most probably between 90 and 95, when this problem started to appear in the church. And he's confronting it. But nobody knows exactly when. Again, the Gospel is written also late, because there's some problems that the Gospel was actually addressing as well as the letter. There are major themes in this letter, and you can summarize it in the underlined phrase. It's the tests of true Christian life. Who is a true Christian? Let me just put this in a more easy way to understand it. He starts by talking about the experience of Christ. He said, he's going to say in the beginning of the letter, what we have seen, what we have handled, what we have heard, what we have touched. And he wants us to have the same experience. And he's going to say who would have the same experience, like the apostles, and who would not. So that letter is almost like a guide and a test to us to experience Christ, like the apostles. So he's going to say what would happen to prevent us from not seeing and touching and experiencing Christ. So in this letter you would hear about, or you would read about Jesus Christ, the incarnate God, who reveals light, love, and life. These are the major themes in the letter of the Father. So Jesus is the light of the Father. He is the love of the Father. He is the life of the Father given to us. And he's going to contrast this with darkness, opposite to light, hatred, opposite to love, and death, opposite to life of the world. There is this contrast. So Christ is the light and the love and the life of the Father, and the world is offering us darkness, hatred, and death. 1 John is a commentary on the reality of the sacraments, especially baptism, chrismation, and the Eucharist, and there's a lot of hints to confession. This is almost like his own commentary on these sacraments, and you're going to notice that in the letter very clearly. The sub-theme, so this is the major theme, is the test of the true Christian life, as Christ being the light, love, and life of the Father, and opposing to the world, with hints and commentary on baptism, chrismation, and the Eucharist, and a little bit about confession too. Sub-themes. Number 1, it is our communion with God and with each other. The close relationship of faith, love, obedience, and life. To have faith and love and obedience, it means that you would have life. The close relationship between love of God and love of others. Very clear. He says the way to love God is to love the other. Number 4, the crucial importance of holding true faith. And he is putting this at equal value with the love of the brother. He says you cannot see Christ until you have these two important items, that you would have the right faith, the right doctrine, and also to love your neighbor. A stark eschatological means, what is eschatological? Anybody understand the word? Eschatology means the end times, the last things. What would happen to us at the end? He says it will be a great discrepancy, a great contrast between the children of God and the children of the world. Now they look like each other. But at the end of times, there will be a very big difference. It will be like night and day, literally. So, I think this is chapter 3 especially. At the beginning of chapter 3, he's going to talk about this very significantly. So let's review it again. So the sub-themes after the test of the true Christian is communion with God and with each other, close relationship of faith, love, obedience, and life, the close relationship between love of God and love of others, the crucial importance of holding the true faith is at equal importance, and then the deep contrast between the children of God and the children of the world. John is very aggressive against two identifiable groups, and apparently they actually lingered in his parish. Where was he? An apostle. Or where was his parish? Where was he?
Smyrna?
It's the whole area of Asia Minor, but he was residing actually in Ephesus. He was in Ephesus. But the whole Asia Minor, because Polycarp was his disciple, and he was the bishop of Smyrna. Ignatius was his disciple, and he was the bishop of Antioch in Syria. So this area, the whole area, was under the shepherding of John. These two groups that lingered and was a problem to the church was the Gnostics. They were not true Gnostics, they were Christians with Gnostic ideas. That's why we have to talk about the Gnostic and what they believed. And you would see that some of that teaching still today, and it is not irrelevant, it's very relevant. The Gnostics are very relevant today, I'm going to tell you why. And the former members, the other group of the church who left. And in the second letter he would say, if they were from us, they would have not left us. There are a group of people that left the church, and they are kind of bombarding and enticing the church members to leave. So this aggressive attitude toward them is mostly pastoral, out of care, and positive, to protect God's people. So don't be offended when John is kind of attacking other groups. That's what he's doing. He's going to talk about them in a most polemically, put it in a very diplomatic way. Polemic means intense against these two groups. Not because he hates them, but he wants to protect his sheep. Sometimes I do this. Sometimes I come across as very aggressive against another groups. But it's not because I really am going to go and fight with them or hate them. I am just worried about us in the church not being true to what we're doing. We're going to be watered down and lose what we have. And it's out of defense. While the addressee is not mentioned, this may be an encyclical to St. John's Diocese of Asia. That's what we said in the beginning. So he's talking to his own churches, to Polycarp, to Ignatius, to the rest of the church members that falls under his shepherding. In the introduction, we're going to the introduction now from 1 to 4. It is a beautiful piece about the incarnation. It's almost exactly the same like John 1. He's going to say, when we go read this, let's go through the outline first and then we'll go to the pieces. He says, talks about the apostolic witness to the incarnation. It starts by we, what we have seen. Who are we? Who is he talking about? Who are the we? The apostles, right. What we have seen, what we have touched, what we have handled. So this is the apostolic witness to the incarnation. They had seen God in the flesh. They had had an experience that they want to tell everybody. So this is the introduction from 1 to 4. Then he's going to turn to talk about the fellowship, the, what do you call that in Greek?
Koinonia.
Koinonia, right. So the koinonia of the apostles with the rest of the church, that they want the church to have fellowship, but not the fellowship that we are familiar with. It's a different fellowship. To live in the light, from 5 to 2:27. And that would include walk in the light of confessed sin. Light here means, in St. John's mind, a very concrete thing, that we don't have anything to hide. We're not hiding anything. We're bringing out everything. This is walking in the light. That's the first condition of a true fellowship with the church and with Christ. To keep Christ's commandments of love. That's number 2. Because if you say I walk in the light and I don't love, I am a liar. That's what St. John would say. To remain in the true teaching about Christ. And the third condition is not to follow any erroneous teaching. And especially those Gnostics that he's going to talk about in the end of chapter 1 and chapter 2. The third part would be live as God's children. After the introduction, living in the light, he's going to talk about live as God's children. Be righteous, love one another, confess that Jesus is God in the flesh. Again, that's one of the things that contradict the Gnostics. The Gnostics say that Jesus never came in the flesh. Live in love and faith. That's the number 4 item. So live as God's children, be righteous, love one another, confess that Jesus is God in the flesh. Number 4 is live in love and faith. God's love becomes our love, that His love becomes our love. Faith brings strength and life. In summary, in chapter 5, he would go to talk about living in God. And he would summarize it in this one very beautiful statement. He says, but our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son. Pray according to God's will, separate from sin and evil, live in Jesus Christ. So these are the items of the letter. Let us go and read a little bit from the beginning. If you have anything to ask about, this would be the time where we'll go into the details of the first chapter. Let's read the first piece, which is 1 to 4. Can someone read for us?
That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled concerning the word of life. The life was manifested, and we have seen and bear witness and declare to you that eternal life which was with the Father and was manifested to us. That which we have seen and heard we declare to you, that you also may have fellowship with us. And truly our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ. And these things we write to you, that your joy may be full.
Very good. So he writes about a material experience of Christ, that the senses actually experience. So that's contrary to the heretics who claim that communion directly with God is not, it's actually not necessary, cannot go through material things. In the Gnostic mind, in the common Gnostics are very different type of, a group of mosaic, different ideologies. But they all are around one idea, that the God, the ultimate God, the supreme God, is not the God who created the cosmos. There is another God who created the cosmos, who's a sub-God, and that sub-God turned evil. So anything material that is found is contradictory to the supreme God.
I think the word was demiurge.
The demiurge, right, with a U, I-U-R-G-E.
So the world is kind of a mistake, and we're living in these corruptible bodies, and we have to get back to the divine spark.
So by this is what they say. So we are the corrupted. Our bodies, our spirit is made by the good God, but our bodies were created by the evil God or the bad God. That's the mistake. And by gnosis, by knowing, by contemplating, by meditating and dying, we can go back to ultimately to the good God. But the body is a mistake, is something bad, evil. So they say the communion, the koinonia, does not involve anything material. Now you understand why St. John starts by what we have seen, what we have touched, what we have handled.
They wouldn't like that.
What is, I want to know, this is like history. This is from a little bit before Christianity and all the way maybe to the 5th century, was very common. And actually the commonest, it was most prevalent in Egypt and Syria. there's something called the Gnostic Gospels, and they historically were found in Nag Hammadi in Egypt. They're Gospels rewritten to describe the work of Christ. And how are we going to be transformed to this kind of status? This is from the Catholic Encyclopedia. A collective name, that's Gnosticism, for a large number of greatly varying and pantheistic idealistic sects who thinks everything is God, which flourished from some time before Christian era down to the 5th century, and which, while borrowing the phraseology, the same phrases, and some of the tenets of the chief religions of the day, especially of Christianity, and you would have a tenth of that in the Kabbalah and the Jewish, and also Jewish have been attacked by the same ideology, held matter to be of a deterioration of spirit, and the whole universe is a deprivation of the deity, and taught the ultimate end of all being is to be the overcoming of the grossness of matter and return to the parent spirit, which return they held to be inaugurated and facilitated by the appearance of some God-sent Savior. So Jesus came to free us, to deliver us from the corrupt, fallen material, and to bring us back to God, the ultimate spirit. So this is their idea. What can we take from this today? What is the smell, the flavor of this? And the people don't understand. This is something that tends even today.
I would think hyper-intellectualism,
Yes. So that,
where you waste your life in non-worldly pursuits.
right. That you would have to get away from everything that has to do with material. The rejection of the mysteries. That our relationship with God should not involve anything material. It doesn't go all the way to say that material is evil. We enjoy material, but God can never and should never use anything material to reach us.
Yeah.
Do you get that?
Yeah.
That's what it is. So anything about like blessed water, blessed bread and wine, blessed oil, icons, anything of that sort is considered out of the... It doesn't say that these things are evil, but God doesn't use them. So you understand, this is a watered down version of Gnosticism. Nobody realized this. They don't realize when they say this. This is when the apostle talks about what we have touched, what we have handled, he is giving us a picture about what he wants to give us. What is he talking about? When he says, I want you to have fellowship with us and with the Father and His Son the same way, what would you do? I want to go and taste Christ and touch Him and handle Him.
That's icky. And that's not Gnostic.
Yeah, he would hate it.
Yeah.
And the person who doesn't believe that God can reach us through material things would say, this is nonsense. Like the other day, a girl who was a Muslim, she came to the church and she said she was visited by a couple of girls from some other church denomination. And they told her she was baptized, and they prayed with her, and they said, now you are a Christian. Because that water means nothing, the immersion meant nothing, and the oil meant nothing. But this is almost a version of Gnosticism.
So they just prayed with her?
They prayed with her. So everything is intellectual, everything is spiritual. There is nothing material involved. And this is the. That's why I'm saying it's contemporary. It's not really a history. We live in a time that hyper-spiritualize everything.
Maybe that's a sentiment that the people have, but it's not a system of thought like in the old days.
No, it is not. No, you're right. There is no preaching that material is evil or you should not use material, but it's inconceivable that God would use material. It's all emotional, spiritual, up in the air. So when we talk about this, the koinonia that he talks about in the Gnostic way, it is a spiritual thing. That's what I want to focus on. That there is a communion with God, but it's all spiritual. There is no material. There is nothing involved material. So he says, no, the communion with God was through the incarnate Son in the flesh. What we have seen, what we have heard, what we have handled, what our hands have handled, what we have touched. So there is a special view here on the Eucharist. There were the physicality of Christ is repulsive to the heretics in the time of St. John. He was talking and hinting to the Eucharist that would be very hateful by or hated by the Gnostics. when we say we, he said, you answer this, the apostles, their testimony is true, not that of the false apostles. While John makes a distinction between divine revelation, he said, when we read it again, there is a divine revelation and there is a human sensory perception. God revealed and we received. So the revelation of God, that he, first of all, that he was from the beginning. When he says, that was from the beginning. Can we read this again? Just focus on this beginning because that's the same thing he says in his gospel. Can we read that part again?
That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled, concerning the word of life.
So from the beginning, that point that which was from the beginning, meaning he was eternal. That he was with the Father. That is the divinity of Christ. But then when he says, heard, seen, looked upon, handled, what's that? That's his
So,
humanity. So he was from the beginning, like he said in the gospel, and the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That was in the beginning with God. That is the divinity of Christ. But then when we have seen, touched, then what's that? That is the humanity. So there is a clarity of teaching on divinity from the beginning and the humanity here. And the same thing comes in Luke. You notice the insistence of the apostles on the same point, that Jesus came in the flesh. In Luke he says, behold my hands, Jesus said to the apostles, and my feet, and it is I myself, handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have. There is insistence that we experience Christ in the flesh. Same thing also in John 1:14, and the Word became flesh, dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. The experience of God in the flesh. When he said to Thomas, reach your finger here and look at my hands, and reach your hand here and put it in my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And Thomas answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. This experience is not a spiritual experience. It's physical. He had seen the risen flesh of Christ, the Son of God, and through that experience he believed. So that insistence of St. John on this has to say something to us today. That be aware that when you come on Sunday to encounter Christ in the Eucharist, you are experiencing the Son of God in the flesh. And that is how you end up by saying, my Lord and my God. So when he says, was from the beginning, he touches upon the generation without beginning of the Son, who is coexistent with the Father. Was, therefore, indicates eternity without beginning, just as the Word himself, the Son, being one with the Father, in regard to equality of substance, is eternal, uncreated. That the Word always existed is signified by the word in the beginning was the word in John 1:1. That's from, I think, St. Clement of Alexandria. Let's talk about koinonia, that you would have koinonia, the Greek. It's far more than fellowship. It's not just that we sit together and share a cup of tea or talk over politics and we are belonging to the same party. We're all Democrats. We're all what's the other one? Republicans. No, that's not the fellowship. That's not the fellowship he talks about here. It is actually personal participation with other believers in the life of Christ. Fellowship with us refers to communion, especially Eucharistic communion, within the Apostolic Church. It is inconceivable to John that the church cannot be one. The church had to be one and united. And one of the biggest cement blocks that keeps the church one is the communion. And you can see this in the prayer of Christ when he says, John 17:11, now I am no longer in the world, he says to the Father, but these are in the world, and I come to you, Holy Father, keep through your name those whom you have given me, that they may be one as we are. And then in 20 he says, I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe in me in the future, through their word, that they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. So there is no way that he can think about different people, different groups, having different fellowship. It's only one group and one fellowship in the mind of Christ. Or that fellowship not be founded on doctrine. That's the theological implication with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ, or sacraments, the liturgical implication of the Canonian. So that oneness, like we said, the same ideas that you find in St. Paul. That oneness have a reason, and that reason come from faith and sacraments. You're going to ask me, so how come that the Catholics have their own system and we have our own church and we don't commune together? Although we don't see this, one person who explained it very nicely. He said, when they came to Christ on the cross, the Catholics and different Orthodox churches, when they came to Christ on the cross, they wanted to divide their garments. There was one garment, a specific one, that was knitted in one piece. There was no seam in it. There was no patching. So what did they say? We cannot divide it. We can make a lot over it. And he said, even if they divided it, they could not divide his body. So they can divide his garment, and they take pieces, but his own body stayed the same. Even if we are not exactly taking communion with each other, but we are one, because the body of Christ that we take in each of all these churches is one. Maybe we cannot take communion in each of these churches, but they take communion, they take the body of Christ. There is some oneness that stays at the depth of the church, that nobody can touch. Continue with the reading, and then we will stop at like the middle of this chapter. So that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, our hands have handled, concerning the word of life, the life was manifested, and we have seen and bear witness and declare to you that eternal life, which was with the Father and was manifested to us. Here I want to say something very personal to John. I think if you read the Gospel and read the letter, you would see there is a very personal relationship between John and Christ. It's written in the Gospel. And the disciple that Jesus loved leaned against his bosom and asked him, who would betray you? And then in the Sea of Tiberias, he always calls himself the disciple that Jesus loved. And he has this very intimate relationship. He had seen something, and he was very attracted, and he couldn't let go. So John speaks in a very, I want to say, romantic, almost, language. When he says that Jesus is life, He is my life. And the life was manifested, and we have seen and bear witness. So he describes in a very intimate language the relationship of the apostles to Christ. And he goes further, and he says, I want to have all of you in this relationship. That's my goal. So if I write to you this letter, my goal from writing this letter, that you would have the same fellowship. Like verse 3. That which we have seen and heard we declare to you, that you also may have fellowship with us, and through the apostles, and truly our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son Jesus Christ. He says, if I get you to listen to me, if I get you to listen to what I'm writing and to understand it, and to come into that full fellowship with the apostles, then you would be in fellowship with the Father and His Son. And these things we write to you that your joy may be full. And the end of this, that you will have full joy. Anything, ask in my name and you'll be given, and your joy will be full. So the message that we heard from him and declared to you, that God is light and in him is no darkness at all. What does he mean by God? That's the same like St. Paul. The Father. He speaks about the Father. He says we never seen, in the Gospel of St. John, there's 2 times when he says, no one at any time had seen the Father. It is the Son who declared him, who showed him to us. And what did he show to us? That God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. So what does he mean by light and darkness? I mean, God is like light. What does that mean? He links in the letter light to. We go to a further place in the letter. Look at chapter, is it 2 or 3, verse 9? 2, verse 9. He who says he is in the light and hates his brother is in darkness until now. He who loves his brother abides in light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. What's the link here? Let me just
Well,
get
if you-
the mathematical equation right. Yeah, go ahead.
If you walk without a light at night, you stumble. So if you have a light, you can walk through the darkness.
Right.
And so that's stumbling right there.
Let me give,
He who hates his brother is stumbling.
because he's in the darkness.
Yeah,
Although he says he's in the light.
yes.
So let me just put this equation. So first he says, God is light and in him there is no darkness, right? So I'm trying to understand what he means. Okay, what kind of light he's talking about. And then he says, who says that he is in the light and hates his brother is in darkness, in reality. So what is he trying to talk about?
He's saying darkness is sin.
Which is,
Light
in
is
this
righteousness.
condition,
I'm sorry?
in this condition, what kind of sin he's talking about especially? It's this word. So light is, I'm going to make the equation. Light, darkness. Well, he says whoever hates is in darkness. So what is light?
Love.
Right? Okay. So God is, and he's going to say it in the letter. Right? He's going to say it in the letter. What is it? Hmm?
Love.
Love. What did you say?
I'm just looking at the Chinese commentary.
I don't know how to get it. I'm meant to go talk to the Chinese maybe. So light is love and darkness is see. So when he's saying that the message we got from Christ is we have not seen the Father. I'm going to tell you why it's so significant. John, especially John, the apostle, from the writing of the gospel, he is very informed about Jewish traditions. And I can tell you that he is very close to the hierarchy of the church, the Jewish church. Why? It says that when he wanted to enter the house of the high priest, he's known to the porter, the girl. And he allowed Peter to go. Peter would have not been able to go where Jesus was tried on the night of his trial without John. John is the one who knows the girl. And he told her, he's with me. He took Peter and went with him to witness the trial in the high priest's house. So apparently John is very close to the hierarchy. He is an insider of the temple officials. And he's very familiar with a lot of the Jewish practices and traditions and teachings. So when he, as a Jew, learns about the Old Testament God, what is he learning? A jealous God, angry God, who would do a lot of atrocities. It's very scary, you know? It's very scary to be in the presence of that God. But then when he met Christ, what happened? That's what I read here. That he says, that's what we learned from it. So I didn't learn anything about God from before? No, I didn't. If you read this, and this is the message which we heard from him and declared to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. What does that mean? You didn't learn that before? From the Torah of Moses?
That means after he met him, he realized
Exactly.
he was love. He's not.
So there is something happened in John after meeting Christ that made a new discovery of that God that he used to worship in the Mosaic law that Moses has revealed. That's why he is flabbergasted. He's like out of himself when he says, the law was given by Moses, but truth and grace was revealed by Christ. So he's making this very, very important comparison. And you understand it is like this he's young. He's a young boy brought up in the Jewish tradition who is so much in the fear atmosphere. And then all of a sudden he sees Christ and he sees a totally different version of what God is like. So he's giving us that message. And in God there's no hate. Because a person who grew up it's very fearful to even think about God. If you can think about God and say he's a hateful person, that's blasphemy. You can't say that. So, and the message that he got from Christ is, no, there's nothing like that in God at all. God is light, and there's no darkness. When he goes to transmit it to the practical terms, God is love. There's no hate in him. He doesn't hate.
How does that work with some of the different Jewish sects? Because obviously they have to wrestle with, God and how he feels about them.
There's some of them, the Sadducees, they don't believe in spirits. They just believe that we are created to live our life and die like animals. There's all kinds of things in the Jewish, you can hear this glimpses. Christ just took the religion, the faith, the doctrine out of the clutches of the culture. Apparently the Pharisees had the right doctrine, but they didn't do the right practice. That's why Jesus said, do what they tell you to do, but don't act like them. But this is actually it actually shakes me when I hear this message, because I look at John as a true Jewish boy who brought up in the Jewish tradition. It's very strong, true. Yes.
That has to raise the question of God is never changing. God never changed. So why are we perceiving God as one way in the Old Testament and now perceiving God as another way when he has never changed? So what's going on between the two?
Yeah, I would say it's, when God delivered the law in the Old Testament, imagine if you're exposed to a court of law. And there's a judge and there's police officers in the courtroom and it's very official.
It's heavy.
Right? And you get a certain sense. Now imagine if the judge stopped you in the hallway and said, hey, and brought you a cup of coffee and sat down with you and you started talking to him.
Yeah.
Outside of court, outside of the context of court. You say, hey, he's not such a bad guy after all.
Right.
So I think Christ kind of revealed that side of God.
The fatherhood.
Where I think when God had to get a job done, he had to deliver the law, and the context, it's more the context of it that shows God to be more fearful, it shows the people to be more fearful of God and that kind of thing. I think Christ didn't come from that angle. He didn't come from the official context.
In the family.
He came out, he's like, okay, now we're outside of court.
Mhm.
Now it's as if I invited you for Thanksgiving dinner and you're gonna spend the day at my house. And that's how Christ came, I think.
And St. Paul is the one that actually struggled with this a lot. He is the one who kept struggling with this all his life. If you read his letters, you can hear his tone as he talks and struggles with the Jewish Pharisees who wants to keep the church under the Jewish law. And he's like, you feel the heat coming out of it. When he says, the law was only a tutor. Like you would discipline your child. Can you imagine? A father comes to a son who's like 50 years old and have a stick or a ship in his hand and running after him. But why would you need the stick? Only you need the stick with a child.
The pedagogue is the slave that is supposed to beat the child if he doesn't go to the master's house. So the master came,
Right.
I'm saying, so,
That is another. So the St. Paul said the same thing. He says when we are under, what is the word he used? Legal. What's the word that when you have somebody who underage and he has a portion that somebody has to run his portion? The custodian.
yeah, custodian.
So the custodian has to control everything until comes the heir to the age. So we're now of age. When Christ came, we're of age. He's not saying that the God has changed. It is us, the church, has changed. You're talking about a culture of very primitive. It's all about blood, killing, stealing, all that stuff that was happening all over the place. Nations were trying to control their subjects by very fierce laws. You can read Hammurabi's law that it's really very, very strong. It's almost very much like the Torah because of the primitive, very tribal type of thing. It's almost like we're living in Africa, in the tribal land where things have to be controlled physically. But then after the prophets, God had done a lot of work to educate his people. We have to see this. We don't see it. We almost put the two like almost happened at the same time, but they didn't. It took God 2,000 years, or between Moses and Christ, to educate his people, sending to the exile, bring them back, teach them with a lot of prophets, and every time a prophet says something they don't like, they kill. The prophets, how many prophets were killed? It was very, very big, bloody history until we come to Christ. And that's why St. Paul actually struggled with this and said that the law was our tutor until the coming of Christ. And Moses put the law, the prophets pressured the people. They were almost always on the case of the people to follow the law. And they not to follow just the letter, to follow also the spirit. And then after many generations, come the people, they already have forsaken the worship of pagan idols that demanded blood sacrifices, human sacrifices, sexual immorality, all kinds of bad things that these idols were demanding of their people to bring them on return fertility. You know, when we talk about, like, say, the Israelites coming from Egypt going to the Promised Land, and I asked this question to the students of the seminary, I said, what was more dangerous? The culture or the advanced weapons of the Canaanites on the Israelites? Which one of the two they had to fight more? Of course, the culture, because the culture is farmers. They are nomadic shepherds. They come into a culture that only land and farms, and they have to find a way to bring in vitality, to bring in fertility. So what is the way to bring fertility to the land? Go to Baal, offer sacrifices. That's easy. And we've done this and it works.
Like everybody else.
Like everybody else. What's the big deal?
Yeah.
So what happened is the Jewish, as they entered the Promised Land, they kept their worship of God, Jehovah, and they added the practical gods who would help them with their fields. So what do you think the prophets would do?
Rail against the Baals.
All the time. So this is a totally different atmosphere. We're talking about God is trying to bring his people to that standard. And it takes a lot of work. It seems that God is very harsh, but it's not. It's not the harshness of God, it's the atmosphere, the local, it's not the personality of God. But then when the time comes, Christ comes to it, to start this mature relationship. Now I'm going to tell you who I am, really. Because the other Baal would be very angry if they don't do what they do, so God has to be more angry even to scare them, because that's the only way. You know, I'm a jealous God, he would say. Anyway, let's pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, make us worthy of say thank you, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Amen. May the love of God the Father and grace of the Son, Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be